The doors of the Riverside police station burst open like they'd been struck by lightning. A golden retriever, mud-caked, blood-soaked, panting like he'd just outrun death itself, collapsed onto the linoleum floor. Strapped to his back with torn fabric was the lifeless body of a little girl. Her hair was matted with blood and dirt. Her face was pale, her arms limp. "Jesus Christ," Deputy Martinez muttered, already racing forward. The dog snarled weakly, warning him not to touch. Even on the brink of collapse, it was still protecting her. Chief Nathan Torres rose from his desk with a chill running down his spine. "That's Brian Sullivan's girl," he said. "Sophia, 8 years old, been missing 72 hours. And the dog?" Martinez asked, dropping to his knees as paramedics rushed in. Torres didn't need to think. "That's Apollo." Time slowed as they cut Sophia free and began administering first aid. The dog's amber eyes never left her face. Not even as blood pooled around his paws. Not even as his breathing went ragged. 3 tranquilizer darts hadn't stopped him. God only knows what he'd pushed through to bring that girl home. The room fell silent when a woman in a black suit stepped in, shaking off her raincoat. Her badge glinted beneath her FBI windbreaker. Agent Victoria Blake took one look at the dog and whispered, "He's trying to tell us something." And with that, Apollo did the impossible. He stood again. He turned toward the door, his body trembling with pain, and looked back with an expression that was unmistakable, even to skeptics. "Follow me." Apollo wasn't just a dog, not to the Sullivans, not to Riverside, and definitely not to Sophia. He'd been rescued from a shelter 3 years ago. A grizzled, silent golden retriever with a notch in his ear and scars running across his flank like some old warrior. They said he was 5, but he looked older, like he had already seen more than most living things should. Brian Sullivan didn't want him. He barely wanted anything at that point. His wife Maria had been murdered in their own home, and Brian, once a respected former Army sergeant turned carpenter, had drowned in grief, traded service medals for whiskey, lost himself in a fog of silence and guilt. He only agreed to keep the dog because Sophia refused to leave the shelter without him. She'd walked straight past the puppies and the lap dogs and knelt in front of the battered retriever like she already knew him. "This one," she said. "His eyes are sad like mine." So Apollo stayed. They became inseparable. Sophia told secrets to him no one else knew. She brushed the dust from his coat and whispered stories to him in bed. And when the nightmares came, screaming memories of the night her mother died, he was always there. At first Brian avoided both of them. The dog was a reminder of Maria. After all, Apollo had been her dog before the murder. The only survivor. He tried to protect her and failed. In Brian's drunken spiral, that failure had been unforgivable. He dumped the dog at the shelter out of blind rage. It was Sophia who brought him back. It was Apollo who never left again. The morning Sophia disappeared started like any other Tuesday. Brian dropped her off at school with a rushed kiss and the usual promise, "See you at 3. Apollo sat in the back of the truck, tail wagging, eyes locked on Sophia as she waved goodbye. "She loves that dog more than anything," Mrs. Chen, her teacher, would later say. You could see it. She didn't trust many people. But that dog, that was her whole world. At 3:15, Brian returned to pick her up. The schoolyard was empty. No Sophia. She was picked up early, the front office told him. Said there was a family emergency. "Wasn't that you?" Brian felt the ground tilt beneath him. No one else is supposed to pick her up. Within an hour, Chief Torres had search teams combing the woods. By nightfall, the FBI was involved, and Apollo was restless, pacing, barking, trying to drag Brian toward the trees behind the school. Brian yanked him back, yelling, "Get it together," as if the dog were just being difficult. "He's picking up on something," Agent Blake had said. Torres waved her off. "We've got trained K9 units. We don't need a pet with PTSD." So Brian locked him in the laundry room. That night, Apollo howled so loud, the neighbors closed their windows. Take a moment to subscribe to Saved by Tales for more true stories of courage, loyalty, and the animals who fight for us when no one else will. This is just the beginning. By the time Brian returned home after midnight, Sophia still missing, the search yielding nothing but shadows. He was unraveling, wet, cold, angry at the world. He opened the laundry room door. Apollo didn't bolt toward food or water. He went straight to the study, Maria's old office, a room Brian hadn't opened since the murder. The retriever clawed at the door, whining, pawing. Brian snapped, "What is wrong with you?" In his frustration, he knocked over a bottle of whiskey. The scent filled the room. Apollo backed away, but didn't break eye contact. Brian stared into those amber eyes, and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Not fear, not defiance, just quiet disappointment. Just as Brian was about to lash out again, his phone rang. "Agent Blake, we found her backpack," she said. "Willow Creek, there are signs of a struggle." When Brian turned back, the front door was swinging open. Apollo was gone. By dawn, Apollo had already covered 15 miles on torn paws. He'd crossed creeks, braved thorn-covered hills, and sniffed through every dead end the world could throw at him. His nose led him beyond the familiar trails of Riverside, into a place locals called Devil's Ridge, a place of old caves, forgotten mining roads, and ghost stories told at bonfires. That night, hidden beneath logs and branches, he found a bunker. He found her, Sophia. She was inside, crying, terrified, but alive. Apollo couldn't reach her through the heavy metal door, but he could press his muzzle to the bottom gap. "Apollo," her voice was weak, "I knew you'd find me." She told him everything in whispers. The smell of cologne, the man who hurt her mom, the window that was too high, the plan to move her that night. Apollo growled, and then without hesitation, he vanished into the dark, crawling through a ventilation shaft barely wide enough for his body. Somewhere down the hall, a guard muttered, "Sterling wants her gone by midnight." Back at the police station, Agent Blake stared at a blinking dot on the map, a new ping from Apollo's microchip, the one she'd activated without telling anyone. She looked at Torres. He found her. Sophia's fingers reached through the small gap under the metal door, trembling, filthy, and bleeding. On the other side, Apollo pressed his nose to the cold concrete, offering her the only comfort he could give. "I knew you'd find me," she whispered. Apollo whined low in his throat. The smell in that place was wrong. Damp concrete, cigarettes, gun oil, and beneath it all that familiar chemical cologne. The one that lingered in Brian's house the night Maria was murdered. Apollo hadn't forgotten. Neither had Sophia. "They're moving me tonight," she said, her voice barely audible. "One of the men. He smells like the one who hurt Mom." Apollo's eyes narrowed, ears pivoting toward the approaching footsteps in the hall. Someone was coming. He slipped into the shadows just as the lock turned. A guard stepped inside holding a tray. "Dinner time, princess," he said with a sneer. He didn't see the blur of muscle and fury until it was too late. Apollo launched himself from the shadows, jaws clamping down on the man's forearm. The tray clattered to the floor, food spilling across concrete. The man screamed, his hand reaching for the pistol at his belt, but Apollo had been trained for moments just like this. He didn't let go. Across town, Brian stood in his kitchen, staring at the broken whiskey bottle on the floor, the leash hanging from his hand, and the open door where Apollo had vanished. Rain hit the windows like a war drum. His breath caught as he remembered that look in Apollo's eyes. Accusation, yes, but more than that, purpose. Brian picked up the phone. "Agent Blake," he said, the moment she answered. "He's gone." In the bunker, chaos erupted. The guard staggered backwards, slamming into the wall, trying to beat Apollo off. More shouts echoed through the corridor. Sophia used the distraction to slip out of her room, barefoot, shivering. "This way," she whispered, leading Apollo toward the storage room she remembered from her first day in captivity. Inside was a narrow window nearly 6 feet off the floor. Apollo paused beneath it. "You want me to climb on you?" The dog stood perfectly still. She scrambled up his back, using his shoulders for leverage, pushing herself up toward the tiny window. Her fingers found the latch. It creaked open. Cool air rushed in. She wriggled through the gap and dropped into the tall grass outside, heart pounding. "Come on, Apollo." but the retriever stayed behind. The window was too small for his thick frame. Apollo barked once, soft, urgent. "They'll catch you," she said, tears running down her face. Apollo barked again, and then he turned to face the shouts echoing down the corridor. He was going to buy her time. Sophia ran. She didn't look back, didn't slow down until she heard her name. "Sophia." She froze. That voice. She spun around. Out of the trees stepped Dr. Rachel Morrison, Riverside's beloved veterinarian, still wearing her lab coat, her vet bag slung over her shoulder. Sophia gasped. "Apollo found me. He's still in there. They're going to hurt him." Dr. Morrison held up a hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." The woman knelt and began digging through her bag. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No, but Apollo just let me check you, okay?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then Sophia smelled it. Cologne, the same cologne. She backed away. "You smell like them." Morrison froze. "What did you say?" "You're one of them." Apollo's ears rang as another gunshot echoed through the bunker. His shoulder burned, but he was still standing. He'd drawn them away, but now outside, Sophia was alone with her. Just then, headlights cut through the trees. A voice shouted from behind. "Sophia!" Brian Sullivan, soaked to the bone, sprinted through the mud with a gun in his hand. Behind him, Agent Blake and 2 armed FBI agents emerged. "Apollo found me," Sophia cried. "He's still inside." Blake didn't hesitate. She raised her sidearm and pointed it directly at Dr. Morrison. Hands in the air now, but it was too late. The woman had already reached into her bag. Apollo exploded from the tree line, crashing into her like a meteor. The syringe flew from her hand. She hit the ground hard. Back in town, news spread fast. The Riverside Sheriff's Department coordinated a full raid of the bunker. Dozens of agents swept the forest. Inside they found evidence of a well-organized trafficking ring. But Sterling, beloved philanthropist, youth center founder, was gone. So was his inner circle. Only the foot soldiers remained, bleeding, arrested, confused. Sophia and Apollo were rushed to the hospital. She had minor scrapes. He was hanging by a thread. The waiting room of Riverside Memorial was filled with silence. Brian sat in the corner, blood on his hands that wasn't his. Sophia slept curled on the seat beside him. A nurse had wrapped her in a warm blanket. Every few minutes, she stirred and whispered, "Is Apollo okay?" "He's fighting," Brian would say, just like he always does. Inside the veterinary wing, Dr. Patterson worked tirelessly. Apollo's injuries were critical: lung damage, blood loss, internal bleeding, and still he hadn't let go. "He's not just surviving," the doctor murmured. "He's choosing to." Hours later, Sophia sat at Apollo's side, stroking the fur on his ear. "He knew," she whispered. "He always knew who hurt Mom." Brian looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The man who took me. He wore the same cologne as the man who came to our house the night Mom died. And the same one Dr. Morrison wore." Brian felt the bottom drop out. Sterling, he'd been there. He was the one. Apollo had smelled it all along. Agent Blake walked in, her arm in a sling. "I need to speak to you privately," she said. Brian didn't want to leave Sophia. Blake nodded to a nurse. "She'll stay with her." Out in the hallway, Blake got to the point. "It's bigger than we thought." Brian stared at her. "Sterling's been running this operation up and down the East Coast, using his youth programs to identify and groom kids. Maria figured it out." Jack swallowed. "My wife was an investigative journalist, Brian. She didn't just stumble on this. She was building a case." Brian stared into nothing, the puzzle pieces rearranging themselves. "She said she was working on something, but never told me what." Blake placed a hand on his shoulder. "She left behind more than you know." Later that night, Sophia was finally asleep. Brian sat by Apollo's bed, whispering, "You were trying to protect her that night. I know that now." Apollo didn't stir, but his heart monitor beeped steady. Brian laid his hand on the dog's side. "You never gave up, even when I did." The next morning, Blake returned with news. "Security footage from the station," she said. Something's wrong with Apollo's collar. What? It's thicker than it used to be. We think something might be inside. They retrieved it from storage. A forensic tech carefully cut it open. Inside they found a small waterproof capsule containing a micro SD card. Blake stared at it almost reverently. Jackpot. As the agents rushed the evidence to a secure lab, Sophia pulled Brian into the hospital garden for a short walk. Apollo, still bandaged, walked slowly beside them. He's looking for something, Sophia said suddenly. See how his ears keep flicking? Brian watched. He's not just walking, he's scanning. Sophia nodded. Mom said he could keep secrets. She said he could find treasure. Brian knelt down, his heart pounding. Treasure. She'd hide things in the yard and say, "Find the treasure, Apollo." Brian's breath caught. "Sophia," he said gently, "did your mom ever hide anything in the pond behind our house?" Sophia tilted her head. "I don't know, but Apollo would." Apollo's ears perked at Maria's name. He was listening. Brian stood. "I need to make a call." The pond behind Brian Sullivan's house wasn't much to look at. A few cattails along the edge, a wooden bench half-rotted from weather, and the murky water that reflected nothing but gray sky and dead leaves. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of place grief settles into like silt. But that afternoon, something stirred beneath the surface. Apollo stood at the edge, eyes locked on the water, muscles tight, despite the bandages on his side. Agent Blake crouched nearby, watching him. "You're really sure about this?" Brian gave a tight nod. Sophia said Maria used to train him here, hide objects underwater, told him to find the treasure. "Any idea what kind of evidence might be down there?" Brian's voice cracked. "If Maria hid it, it's big, and it's everything." Blake exhaled. "All right, let's see what this dog's got." Brian crouched beside the golden retriever and placed a hand on his soaked fur. "Okay, boy," he whispered. "This is the last thing she asked of you. Let's finish it." He looked Apollo in the eye. "Find the treasure." The dog didn't hesitate, despite his injuries, despite the fatigue still weighing on his frame. Apollo stepped into the water, like he'd done it 100 times. Within moments, he was swimming. He paddled toward the center of the pond, paused, and then dove. Sophia watched from the safety of the car parked nearby, her hands pressed against the window. Dr. Patterson sat beside her in the passenger seat, nervously watching the pond. "Is he going to be okay?" Sophia asked. "He's doing what he was trained for," the doctor replied. "But he's pushing himself harder than any dog should, especially after what he's already been through." Back at the water's edge, the surface rippled and then Apollo emerged, something clutched in his mouth. Brian ran forward and caught the dripping, mud-streaked object. It was a waterproof plastic case the size of a lunchbox. Apollo turned without fanfare and dove again. By the time he was done, he'd retrieved 5 identical cases. Then finally, he staggered from the water and collapsed at Brian's feet. Blake called over her tech team immediately. Inside the first case were photographs, financial records, and a small voice recorder. Brian recognized the handwriting instantly. Maria's. Blake held up a folder full of account transfers, company names, and real estate holdings. "This connects Sterling to 3 offshore companies tied to child trafficking," she said, flipping through the pages almost breathlessly. "Brian, this isn't just a case, this is the whole damn operation." Brian didn't speak. He was too busy kneeling next to Apollo, whispering, "Good boy. You did it. You really did it." That night, back at the safe house, Brian couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, one hand wrapped around a cup of black coffee, the other holding a sealed envelope he'd found in the last case, addressed simply, "For Brian." Maria's handwriting. He'd know it anywhere. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a letter and a small flash drive. The letter was dated the week before her death. "Brian, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. Please know I did everything I could to protect you and Sophia. But Sterling is dangerous. I got too close, and I knew my time was running out. I trained Apollo for this, for the day I couldn't be there. He's not just a dog, he's a safeguard, a courier, a soldier, but most of all, he's family. Trust him, even when you can't trust yourself. You're stronger than you think. I love you. I love our daughter. Keep her safe, and when the time is right, bury them with the truth. Maria. Brian stared at the paper for a long time, before folding it and pressing it to his chest. The next morning, Agent Blake walked in with tired eyes and fresh intel. Sterling made contact. Brian stiffened. What? He's offering a trade. Sophia's safety in exchange for the original evidence. He thinks we only have copies. He doesn't know we have the pawned cases. Brian clenched his jaw. He wants a meeting, doesn't he? Blake nodded. Tomorrow night, private location. You go alone. Brian stared out the window. It's a trap. Absolutely. But we'll be there. Meanwhile, back in town, the story had gone public. Local news stations were reporting a hero dog that had led the FBI to a criminal trafficking ring. The hospital was flooded with flowers and cards for Apollo. Strangers sent donations, toys, and dog treats. One card simply read, "Thank you for bringing her home." That evening, Brian took Sophia for a walk around the farmhouse property. Apollo walked beside them, slower now, but stronger every day. "Daddy," Sophia said, "do you think Mom's proud of him?" Brian looked down at the scarred golden retriever, and then at his daughter. "I think she's proud of both of you." Sophia stopped, eyes searching the horizon. She used to say Apollo could smell lies. Brian smiled. She wasn't wrong. Later, Blake reviewed the voice recording found in one of the waterproof cases. Maria's voice, crisp and clear. "This is Sophia Sullivan. If you're hearing this, I've likely been killed. Thomas Sterling is trafficking children through his charities. I have financial records, photographs, and personal testimony. I'm storing it in a place only my dog can access. I'm trusting him with everything. If you find this, don't let him walk away." Blake sat back in her chair. No jury in the country would let him go now. The night of the meeting arrived. Brian wore a hidden wire. Tactical teams were staged miles away. A drone tracked the area from above. The meeting place, an abandoned barn on the edge of an old tobacco field. When Brian entered, Sterling was already there. Same tailored suit, same smug expression. "You look tired, Brian," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "You look like a man running out of road." Brian replied. "Do you have what I asked for?" Brian held up a briefcase loaded with dummy files. "Where's my daughter?" Sterling smiled. Then came the click of a gun. But before the shot could be fired, the barn's rafters lit up with red dots. "Laser scopes, FBI." A voice thundered, "Drop your weapon." Sterling froze. Seconds later, Blake stepped into the light. "End of the line, Thomas." He laughed bitterly. "Took you long enough." Back at the safe house, Brian returned to find Sophia asleep on the couch. Apollo curled protectively beside her. He sat down on the floor next to them. "You did it, buddy," he whispered, scratching behind Apollo's ears. "You brought us home." The dog gave a quiet grunt and laid his head back down. 2 weeks later, the trial began. Sterling pleaded not guilty. Didn't matter. The evidence Maria had preserved, plus Dr. Morrison's full confession, sealed the case. He'd never see daylight again. The last time Brian visited Maria's grave, he brought 2 things with him: Sophia and Apollo. He placed Maria's letter and a photo of the dog taken the day Sophia was rescued on her headstone. Then he knelt and whispered. He kept his promise. Behind him, Sophia placed a bouquet of lilies on the grave. "I miss you, Mommy," she said. "Apollo says hi." The farmhouse was quiet, too quiet. Brian had learned to fear that kind of silence, the kind that hangs heavy after the storm, but right before something worse. He sat on the couch, Sophia asleep on his shoulder, her small hand curled into his flannel shirt. Across the room, Apollo lay on a thick blanket, bandages still wrapped around his torso.
but his ears twitching, alert, even in rest. It had been a week since Sterling's arrest. The case had exploded across national news. Maria's name was in headlines. Apollo was called a miracle dog by anchors who didn't even know the half of it. And Brian had become something of a symbol. A father who lost everything and clawed his way back. But he wasn't thinking about the cameras or the trial. He was thinking about what Blake had told him earlier that day. "We think someone tipped Sterling off before the raid," she'd said. "It had to be someone inside our system. And that meant one thing. They weren't safe yet." At 3:07 a.m., the glass in the back kitchen window shattered. Apollo's head shot up. Brian's eyes flew open. He didn't say a word. He scooped Sophia into his arms and rolled off the couch, pressing her to the floor behind the armchair. She stirred but didn't scream, just like he'd trained her. "Stay down," he whispered. Footsteps creaked across the porch, slow, deliberate. Apollo let out a low growl, the kind that comes from deep in a dog's chest, a sound older than language, older than fear. Brian reached for his phone. No signal. The power had been cut. Then the front door swung open. Framed in the moonlight stood Thomas Sterling, alive, free, and holding a gun. "Hello, Brian," he said casually, like he was stopping by for coffee. "You've got something that belongs to me." Brian's throat went dry. "You're supposed to be in custody." Sterling smiled. "Money buys many things. Time, influence, silence. Sometimes it buys freedom." He stepped inside, the hardwood creaking under his boots. Beside him stood Dr. Rachel Morrison, pale, trembling, still clutching her vet bag like it could save her. Brian rose slowly, putting himself between them and the couch where Apollo now stood, growling, his hackles up. "You're not taking her," Brian said. Sterling didn't even blink. "The girl, oh Brian, I don't want her. I want what Maria left behind." "You're too late. The FBI has it all." "Not all," Sterling said, his tone tightening. "She kept backups, physical ones, and I think you know where they are." "You're wrong." "I don't think I am." Behind Brian, Sophia peeked out. "Daddy." Sterling's eyes lit up when he saw her. "You should have kept her hidden," he said, lifting the gun. Apollo moved so fast even Brian didn't see it coming. One moment he was beside the couch. The next he was airborne, a mass of fur and fury. The gun went off. Apollo slammed into Sterling, knocking him backward into the wall. The weapon skidded across the floor. Dr. Morrison screamed and dropped to her knees, clutching her stomach. Blood seeped through her fingers. Brian lunged for the gun, but Sterling got to it first. They fought, fists, knees, elbows, years of rage behind every punch. Apollo, despite his reopened wounds, leapt again, locking his jaws around Sterling's wrist just as the gun fired. The bullet missed Brian. Sophia screamed. Apollo collapsed, blood spreading fast. Brian roared, slamming Sterling to the ground. This time he didn't hold back. A punch, then another, and another, until Sterling stopped moving. Until silence returned. Only now it wasn't empty. It was full of something much worse. "Apollo," Sophia sobbed, crawling toward the retriever. "Please wake up." Brian knelt beside her. "He's breathing," he whispered, but barely. Sirens howled in the distance. Help was coming, but it might be too late. Apollo's breathing was shallow. His eyes fluttered. Blood soaked the bandages, the floor, Brian's hands. "You did good, boy," Brian whispered. "You saved us again." Apollo's tail thumped once, then stillness. "No," Sophia screamed. "Don't go." Brian wrapped his arms around her, both of them clinging to the dog that had carried their pain, their hope, their lives for years. The sirens got louder, closer, but not fast enough. 15 minutes later, the house was swarming with FBI agents. They cuffed Sterling, barely conscious. Paramedics worked on Dr. Morrison. She would survive. Blake sprinted in, took one look at Apollo, and grabbed the radio. We need a medevac. Animal trauma. Priority 1.
The medic shook her head.
He's not stable enough to move.
Sophia wiped her tears and stood.
Yes, he is.
The girl who'd once been silent now looked every adult in the eye.
My mom trained him for this. He's playing dead.
He did it before. He's just waiting for it to be safe again. Everyone froze. Blake crouched beside her. Sophia, what did you say? He's not dying, she said. He's hiding. Brian met the agent's eyes. She's right. An hour later, a helicopter touched down. Apollo was loaded onto a gurney, EVs in both legs, blood pressure hanging by a thread. Sophia refused to let go of his paw. In the air she whispered to him, "You promised Mom you'd protect us. You kept your promise. Now let me keep mine. I'm going to get you home." At the Richmond Veterinary Trauma Center, the team was waiting. They had prepped an operating room, stocked canine blood, cleared every schedule. "He's critical," the lead surgeon said. "Multiple reopened wounds, lung damage. He's in shock. Can he make it?" Brian asked. The doctor paused. "If he wasn't the dog he is, I'd say no." Hours passed. The waiting room was silent, except for the hum of the vending machine and the beeping monitors in the back. Sophia had fallen asleep in Brian's lap. Dr. Patterson arrived with supplies. Blake brought updates. And then finally, the surgeon stepped out. Brian stood. "How is he?" The man pulled off his gloves. "He's alive. He made it through surgery, but the next 24 hours will be touch and go." Brian looked down at his daughter, still asleep. "She said he was playing dead," he whispered. "She might have been right," the doctor replied. "I've never seen anything like it." That night, they were allowed to see him. Apollo lay in a recovery kennel, hooked up to oxygen, wrapped in fresh gauze, his breathing steady but faint. Sophia stepped in first. He opened his eyes just for her. "Hi, buddy," she whispered. "We're safe now." Apollo gave a soft whine. She knelt beside him, resting her hand on his head. "I told you," she said. "You're not done yet." Across town the final pieces fell into place. With Dr. Morrison talking, and Sterling's confession secured, law enforcement raided dozens of facilities tied to the trafficking ring. Children were rescued, homes were reunited, and Maria's evidence, every file, recording and photo was released to the public. She became a national hero, but for Brian and Sophia, she was something even more powerful, the woman who planned for everything. The mother who prepared her daughter, even in death. The wife who believed in a dog when no one else did. In the days that followed, Brian stood vigil beside Apollo's bed. When Apollo finally stood, wobbly, slow but standing, the staff applauded. When he barked again for the first time, Sophia cried, not because she was scared, but because she knew the fight was over, and they had won. The sun was rising over the Blue Ridge Hills when Apollo took his first unaided steps. His legs trembled, muscles weak, but he moved forward anyway, steady, determined. Brian stood beside the recovery kennel, a coffee cup in one hand, a leash in the other. Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor, holding her breath. "You're doing it," she whispered. "Good boy." Apollo paused, looked at her, and let out a soft huff. It wasn't a bark, it wasn't quite strength, but it was enough. Dr. Patterson stepped forward quietly, observing the scene. "He's healing faster than I expected. Strong will, strong heart." Brian gave a tired but grateful smile. He always had more heart than the rest of us combined. The world outside their small orbit kept turning. Sterling was in federal custody now. No bond, no more influence to buy silence. He'd be facing multiple life sentences, and with Maria's evidence made public, there was no path back for him. Dr. Morrison remained in a medical holding facility, recovering from her injuries and awaiting trial. Her confession had filled in the final gaps. She'd known about the trafficking network, had chosen loyalty over morality, but in the end she'd flinched, and that hesitation had saved Sophia's life. Blake had told Brian quietly, "There's a very slim chance she might get some leniency. Not forgiveness, but maybe redemption." Brian didn't have the energy to care. All that mattered now was what came next. A few days later, Brian was packing a small overnight bag when one of the hospital nurses approached him in the hallway. "Mr. Sullivan, we found something." She held out a simple wooden box, old, smooth, handcrafted. It was under Apollo's bed. The FBI team found it when they were collecting evidence from your house. Carved on the lid in delicate cursive were the words for Brian, Maria's handwriting. Brian's chest tightened as he reached for the box. Inside were two things: a sealed envelope and a small voice recorder. His hands shook as he sat down in the waiting room. Sophia and Apollo were still napping in the ICU. For once the world was quiet. He pressed play. Maria's voice came through, soft but unwavering. "Brian, if you're hearing this, something has happened to me. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything while I was alive. I thought I had more time. I thought I was being careful enough. But I also knew that if anything ever happened, I'd need you to finish what I started. You always told me you weren't good with feelings, but you were wrong. You loved hard, you just didn't know how to show it sometimes. That's why I trained Apollo, not just to protect Sophia, but to guide you back if you got lost. There's a light in you, Brian. I saw it the first time you walked into my life with that crooked smile and the loudest laugh in the room. Don't let my death turn that light off. Don't give it to grief or guilt. You're still her father. You're still you." Brian felt like the floor beneath him had dropped away. Maria's voice, after all this time, still held that calm strength, that unwavering faith in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. Love her, and when she asks questions about me, don't make me a ghost. Make me real and trust the dog, Brian. He's smarter than all of us." There was a pause. "Then I love you. I always have. I always will. Keep going. She needs you. And so do I." The tape ended with a quiet click. Brian didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there staring at the wall, holding on to her voice like it was a lifeline. That night, he read the letter aloud to Sophia. She cried. So did he. And Apollo, lying at their feet, let out a long, contented sigh. It was the sound of peace. Weeks passed. Apollo was discharged from the trauma center with instructions for light walking, plenty of rest and follow-up checkups. But no one could stop him from doing what he wanted, staying close to Sophia's side at all times. They returned to Riverside quietly. The house still smelled like memory, but it no longer felt haunted. Brian spent a few days clearing out Maria's office, not erasing her, but bringing her into the light. He framed her journalism awards, and placed a photo of her with Sophia on the mantel. He replaced the dusty liquor bottles with books, and every evening he cooked dinner, even if it was just grilled cheese, and the three of them sat at the table like a family again. Apollo got his own chair, of course. One morning, as the first snow of the season dusted the back porch, Brian found Sophia standing by the sliding glass door in her pajamas. She was watching the pond. Apollo sat beside her, tail swaying lazily. "Thinking?" Brian asked, handing her a cup of hot chocolate. She nodded, "Just remembering." "Anything in particular?" Sophia took a sip, then looked up at him. "Do you think Mom knew she was going to die?" Brian hesitated. "I think she knew the danger, but she hoped she could stop it in time." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "She didn't just leave evidence. She left instructions." Brian raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "She told Apollo what to do. She trusted him more than anyone, even more than you." Brian didn't take offense. He smiled. "She was usually right." Later that week, Agent Blake stopped by. She looked different out of her FBI gear, more relaxed, still sharp but human. She brought donuts and case updates. The files Maria kept, they're leading to more arrests across the country. Her work is helping dismantle something a lot bigger than we imagined. She paused. She changed everything. Brian looked down at the recorder on the kitchen table. "Yeah, she always did." As Blake was leaving, she knelt to scratch Apollo behind the ears. "You did good, partner," she said softly. Apollo gave her a look that almost resembled pride. That Sunday, the three of them, Brian, Sophia and Apollo, visited Maria's grave. There were fresh flowers already there, left by strangers. Sophia added her own, a bundle of wild daisies wrapped in ribbon. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Brian took a deep breath. I used to come here and feel nothing but guilt, he said. I blamed myself. I blamed this dog. I shut down. He looked at Sophia. But you brought me back. Then at Apollo, and you never gave up on me. Apollo didn't move. He didn't need to. Brian stepped forward, kneeling by the headstone. I promise you, Maria, I'm going to raise her right. I'm going to give her the life you dreamed of. And when she asks about you, I'll tell her the truth. All of it, even the hard parts. Sophia came beside him and rested her head on his shoulder. She already knows you were brave, Brian whispered. Now she'll know you were also brilliant and kind, and funny, and real. Apollo sat between them, silent, but solid. The three of them still here, still standing. Back at home, Sophia pulled a worn notebook from her backpack and handed it to Brian. What's this? My story, she said. I'm writing it all down for other kids, so they know they're not alone. Brian opened the first page. In careful handwriting, it said, My name is Sophia Sullivan. I was taken, but I was never truly lost because someone always believed in me. Because a dog named Apollo never stopped looking. And because my mom left behind a map. This is our story. 1 year later, the farmhouse looked different. Not just because of the new paint job or the vegetable garden Brian and Sophia had planted together. Not just because the porch now had a swing, but because the air felt different, lighter, like the weight of grief had finally started to lift one breath at a time. It had been 365 days since they brought Apollo home from the trauma center, since Brian opened Maria's final message, since they chose to live, not just survive. And today wasn't just any day. Today was Apollo's retirement ceremony. The small-town firehouse had never seen such a crowd. Rows of folding chairs were filled with neighbors, reporters, kids with signs that read "Thank you, Apollo," and even a few officers from the FBI. Brian adjusted his tie awkwardly at the podium, while Sophia stood beside him, proudly holding Apollo's leash. The golden retriever, now fully recovered, sat alert, chest puffed out, tail wagging gently. He wore a custom vest that read "Retired, still a hero." Brian cleared his throat. Folks, I'm not a man of many speeches, but today I've got to try. The room grew quiet. A year ago I was lost. I was drowning in grief. And then everything changed. Not just because a bad man was caught, but because a dog refused to give up. And because a little girl believed in both of us. He paused, looking at Sophia. And because my wife had left behind a legacy stronger than fear. There were a few sniffles in the room. Apollo didn't just save Sophia, he saved me too. And today we honor him, not just for what he did, but for what he gave back. Brian knelt beside the dog and removed the vest gently. From a small wooden box, he pulled out a new tag engraved with a simple line, "Always faithful, forever family." He clipped it to Apollo's collar. "Welcome to retirement, buddy." The crowd erupted in applause. Apollo didn't bark, he didn't move. He just leaned into Brian's chest, closed his eyes, and sighed. After the ceremony, they returned home to a celebration of their own. Just close friends, some cupcakes, a table full of old photos, and laughter. Laughter had been rare for so long. Now it flowed freely. Blake stayed late. She was moving to a new field office in Seattle, but had made the trip back for this day. "You ever think about writing it all down?" she asked Brian, sipping iced tea on the porch swing. He nodded toward the kitchen, where Sophia was showing her homemade storybook to 2 other kids. "I don't need to. She already is." Blake smiled. "Then I think you'll be just fine." That night, after everyone had left and the stars took over the sky, Brian sat alone by the pond. Apollo lay beside him, head resting on Brian's boots. The water shimmered. The same pond, where Maria had hidden the truth, where a battered dog had once swum through pain to bring hope to the surface. Brian pulled out a letter, one last one he'd written that morning. He unfolded it slowly. "Maria, you told me once that grief would either harden a person or crack them open. For a while, I let it harden me. I pushed people away. I pushed myself away. But you gave me a road back through your voice, through Sophia, through him. I wish you could see her now. Brave, funny, so much like you. It hurts sometimes, but in the best way. We're okay now. I think." "No, I know.
We're going to be okay. Thank you for never giving up on us. I'll carry you always, Brian. He folded the letter and dropped it into the water, where it floated briefly before sinking like a promise absorbed into the earth. Over the following months, life kept moving. Sophia started 4th grade. She joined the school newspaper and published her first piece, How My Dog Saved the World and Me. Brian began volunteering at the local shelter, rehabbing troubled dogs just like Apollo had once been. They built a new fence, planted sunflowers, and adopted a rescue pup named Max, a goofy lab mix with more energy than sense. Apollo approved. He spent his retirement sunbathing, patrolling the porch, and sometimes when the night was too quiet, curling up at the foot of Sophia's bed, just like old times. On the anniversary of Maria's passing, they held a small ceremony at the pond. No speeches, no tears, just music, candles and stories. Sophia read from her journal. My mom used to say that love isn't something you lose, it's something you grow into. At first I didn't understand that, but now I do. Because every time I look at Apollo, I see her love. Every time I laugh with Dad, I feel it. Love doesn't die, it just changes shape. Brian placed a small wooden carving by the bench, a golden retriever with angel wings, and beneath it a plaque, Sophia Sullivan, mother, wife, warrior. She lit the path. We followed the light. That evening, as they sat watching fireflies dance across the fields, Sophia leaned against Brian. Do you think Mom's proud of us? Brian smiled. I think she never stopped being proud. Apollo wagged his tail as if to agree. And do you think Apollo knows he's a hero? Brian ruffled the dog's fur. I think he knows he's loved, and that's what matters most. One last thing before we end this story. Thank you for following this journey from the first bark to the final breath of peace. For believing in the bond between a girl, her dog, and a broken father who found healing in their love. This story wasn't just about danger or darkness. It was about endurance, loyalty, family, and hope. Now we'd love to hear from you. What would you do if your dog tried to lead you somewhere? Would you follow them without question? Or have you ever had a pet that you swear understood you better than most people? Drop your answers below. We'll be reading them all. And if Apollo's story touched your heart, please share this video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to Saved by Tales for more powerful stories like this one. From all of us, thank you.